Does realism in art still matter? Is it outdated, meaningless, overrated? I think the essence of this controversy is the two opposing sides of pure technical skill versus artistic expression. In this video, I want to explore both sides with a focus on the question whether realism still matters in today's art with my perspective on it, while you see me drawing a portrait study on toned paper. I'm going to start this whole discussion with something a lot of people have to say about this topic. If you draw realistic, you're just a copy machine, redundant in an age where technology captures reality better than any drawing or painting ever could. And I'm assuming and hoping this is addressing hyperrealism. Hyperrealism is a field in art intending to portray things from real life as realistically as possible, with the outcome looking as real as photos. That's why you could also call it photorealism. Now, a lot of people argue since the rise of photography, there is no need for portraits anymore, no need to portray people exactly how they look and capture it in the form of paintings or drawings. And I think this is a very, generalized statement and a bit too broad and not specific enough. When we talk about pure photorealism, a piece of art so flawless you could mistake it as a photo with just the intention of recreating one, then I would agree it might, in some cases, lack intellectual meaning. That does not mean it provides no value, but when you recreate a photo with the intention of creating an exact duplicate, there's just no intellectual intention and idea behind it. And that's totally fine. It is, after all, a more than impressive display of technical skill. But if we are comparing drawing from reference with being labeled as a copy machine, then I have to hardly disagree. I see this quite often, and I get comments like this too now, where people refer to studying from references or using them to create an artwork as copying from photos. And to this I say there's a big difference between having the literal goal to copy a photo and to capture the core spirit of a reference. The value of realism in art for me is the translation of reality through an artist's mind. An artist is the interpreter of what said artist sees in a photo or in real life. He processes the raw information and transforms it according to his interpretation. The big difference to me between hyperrealism and other realism categories in the fine art industry is accuracy, precision, and determination to detail. For photorealism, it is essential to include even the tiniest detail to fulfill the dedication to recreate exactly what you see. Artwork which doesn't want to simply recreate an existing image, on the other hand, doesn't need this level of detail. Oftentimes you see great artists doing charcoal or graphite portraits which look stunning, but not because they aim to be photorealistic, but because those artists focus on a very specific essence of the model or reference. This can be a facial expression captured masterfully, the symbiosis of light and shadow, or composition. I will give you an example of my own drawing to visualize my talking point here. This is a study I did last year, and this is not photorealism. It may look somewhat realistic, but if I show you the reference, you can immediately tell that this does not look like the source material. And I mean, besides from it having obvious flaws in direct comparison, I want to show you what I really wanted to capture with this. This was a study with the focus being on capturing proportions, shapes, and values. And although the right eye, for example, is way too big and other things are off and not as seen as in the reference, it is still a somewhat believable portrait. And I think this is what it all comes down to. creating believable work. And with believable, I mean authentic and understandable. And you don't need to be photorealistic to create a believable portrait. Values and proportions play a big role here, and also learning to understand and to use them for your advantage. In photorealism, you will often see people like to use the grid method or just straight up trace outlines for a drawing to be as precise as possible, which again is totally fine and valid. I don't judge anyone who loves creating photorealistic art. Actually, I think you can do awesome things with it, and before I jump to its defense, I want to give you a glimpse of the other side of the spectrum, and I mean the total opposite of what we just talked about. Okay, just to get this straight, my first encounter with something which could not be any further away from realism and technical skill was when I studied communication design, and there was a very strong flavor of modern art involved. You might already see where this is heading, so let me demonstrate to you what I learned from lecturers of the modern art industry in Germany on how figurative art should look like. This was the gold standard of figurative art. And by the way, the teachers heavily encouraged you to often do this blindfolded. Actually, the more limitations you gave yourself, the better. A+. How so? Well, the art in this is supposed to be the process, which is a very big difference to photorealistic art, in which the result matters most. But here, on the other hand, the result doesn't matter really. It's the process. And I got to know this field of generative art a little bit, which is, in my opinion, the opposite pole of creating realistic art. And I was really flabbergasted. It totally caught me off guard back then because I did not see any meaning behind it. It is an approach to art where craftsmanship absolutely doesn't matter, in my opinion. It is purely about the process and algorithm you set up, and you actively draw back learned techniques and knowledge. You, as the artist, express yourself only through what calculated actions you set up, and oftentimes with the help of technology. Generative art is mostly done with the help of AI and programs, so there isn't even a craft involved anymore. You enter coordinates or formulas into a program to generate an image, which is then ultimately the artwork. And something I don't fully appreciate in general about modern art is the injection of a superficial meaning behind everything. To me, this superficial meaning only or often exists only as a selling point and advertising of the artwork. Oftentimes, it is way too easy and convenient to just come up with something to give the piece more substance after the piece is already created. Like for this here, I could say the blind movement of my hand represented naivety and innocence. Projecting the image of my great-grandfather before my shut eye. I remember standing in front of him when I was all too young, and movement from left to right represents coordinates back to locations of places. See what I mean? It's this pseudo-poetry injected into an intentionally algorithmic image. And what gives it most away for me was that one of the lecturers in a private conversation with me actually basically confessed he wished he could draw anatomically correct. This to me just showed that this form of art can actually be used as an excuse to not develop skill, because what's really keeping you from improving and becoming better? Or do you just not want to deal with the frustrations and setbacks which come along with it? To me personally, art also includes the craft as such, as well as discipline, education, and tradition. Now, I am someone finding joy in drawing the human figure and face. And if you see yourself as someone who creates in some way realistic, figurative art, I think we should go back to the fundamentals. And there is nothing wrong with studying references to learn how those real things work. I still have a long way to go, and I know I have a ton more to learn to be able to visualize my ideas properly in the future. I actually have big respect for hyperrealism artists because of their dedication and hard work, and I want to defend them in a way now. Within hyperrealism, there are also multiple categories. There are artists purely finding joy and purpose in copying photos with, like I said, no intellectual meaning. But there are also others who use their master skill level to implement subtle messages in the form of arrangements, color, and themes. This might be controversial, but I think some hyperrealism artists are actually really creative in their execution of whole artworks. Besides from that, I think the appeal of realism as a whole is that it can be really beautiful. There is beauty in portraying real life, humans, and nature, and art should have a right to be beautiful. In modern art, there's this belief that beautiful artwork is shallow and empty. It lacks substance and is superficial, and only chaotic, ugly, and uncontrollable visuals transmit truth. I disagree. To me, beauty in art has meaning because it triggers something within people. And after all, this is one of the big aspects of art, right? So to answer my initial question, yes, I do believe realism in art still matters in modern times, and I hope it will continue to matter. Humans and nature are fascinating subjects and have always been essential to art. But I want to add on to this by giving you my personal view on this. I think realism thrives most when used in combination with our fantastic creative minds to create something truly unique. I think what makes art interesting for people or potential buyers is a story behind it, an emotion or a connection they can build with the audience, and that requires creative skill. So where am I standing in all this? Well, in all honesty, I think I'm pretty much on the beginning. Last year, I really gave myself a boot camp to study and learn a lot of fundamentals desperately needed to create, I'd say, semi-realistic art. I always knew I wanted to do figurative art and portray humans in some way, and well, to be able to do this, I need to know my fundamentals. This year, however, will be a bit different for me because I want to as well put thought into the creative side of things. Even when I do studies, like I'm doing right now, I like to at least implement some imaginative, free elements to infuse more creativity in my drawings. Ultimately, I want to create big artwork with a story or emotion behind it, but I still have a long way to go. I'm doing this step by step. Studying realism has already taught me so much about basic knowledge, which I refused to learn back then when all I wanted to do was to create stylized drawings. I think every artist can benefit from learning realism, and as you might know, many huge artists like Picasso first learned how to paint realistic in order to stylize it. What I'm saying is, realism can be beneficial. It doesn't have to be the end goal, although for some it might and totally can be. There is a lot of skill and knowledge behind it, and sometimes studying these things means you're spending quite some time working with references or even recreating photos, but it doesn't have to mean you're forever stuck in it. But to be able to, for example, draw from your imagination, you have to build up your visual library. You can't pretend you can draw anything without ever looking at the source, unless you make it so abstract people recognize the intention, and that would pretty much sum up how I would define decent art. Being very intentional. To me, it's as easy as that. If you aim to draw or paint realistic, semi-realistic, or stylized, like for example comic style, you're part of the game, and studying realism will give you a lot of value. It has at the very least a very educational purpose, and therefore I 100% say that realism in art still matters. But where do you draw the line, and what's your take on all this? I would love to hear it in the comments, and until then, I'll see you in the next video.